Hi guys, how are you? My name is Pepper, and my goal for 2025 is to start a webtoon while also documenting the process. The first step to create a comic or webtoon is having an initial idea of what story you want to tell. In my case, coming up with an idea is not necessarily the difficult part, but being consistent is hard. There is this concept that I like to call the creation cycle, which technically consists in the following pattern. You get an idea and you start working on it almost immediately. The first weeks you are so immersed that the only thing in your mind is creating. But time passes and suddenly you find yourself drifting away from your work. Once I fail, I have the tendency to look at it as a mistake. And the more I try to create, the more mistakes or failures I seem to make. Gosh, you can even finish this! I've said to myself so many times. But I've decided to change the way I think. Instead of failures or mistakes, why not think of it as some sort of experiment? I'll talk about 4 points that came from that thought. Creating is experimenting. Number 1. Past projects and why I dropped them. The first project was a Wattpad story. So the thing is, I wanted to create a webtoon, but I didn't feel confident enough to draw a whole comic. So I opted for a different way and decided to write a story on Wattpad and include my drawings at the end of every chapter. Spoiler, it didn't work out because it wasn't what I wanted to do. Love, drama, friendship. I made a comic in the traditional way and I started uploading on tapas. I remember just being so focused on the story that I drew the first chapter and uploaded almost immediately. I didn't know where the story was going, and I stopped after reaching a burnout in chapter 5. Do you know that feeling you experience once you finish high school? Well, that mix of emotions is what inspired the story of Eric and Julie. This time, having learned a few lessons from my previous project, I decided to first draw chapter drafts and then proceed to do the line art, the coloring, and backgrounds. And this story reached chapter 9 in drafts, and each character has a very detailed background. Eric and Julie are not entirely dropped, but it gave me the push to try once more, maybe hoping that I could get over that chapter 9 record. Number 2. Things I wish I knew from the start. There are a ton of other projects between the Wattpad story and Eric and Julie story. I feel like each time I will try again without really processing what I was learning. Now, looking back, there are a few things I wish I could have known before. This is the messy part. You're allowed to do whatever you want and to take the story as far as possible. The first time you're telling a story, you're telling it to yourself. It's funny to think that I didn't want to fully immerse myself in art until recently because I wanted my first project to be perfect. The type of work that you find and think to yourself, whoa, this is a masterpiece and it's their first project. But every artist's growth is different, so just create what you want to create, even if it's not perfect. When we tell a story, there are a lot of things we want to say. Sometimes the problem is not so much the lack of inspiration, but maybe the lack of focus. I believe every story has a lot of strings. Each line represents an idea, only that one of the strings is sturdier than the rest. That is your main string, and you should not forget about it. If you're telling a story about a found family, that should be your string. If you're telling a story about friendship, that should be your string. And if you're telling one about self-esteem, that should be your string. You should include all the things that you want. It's your story after all, but remember the string that represents the essence of your work. Number 3. Techniques that I'm currently using. I want to share 2 techniques that I'm using now for my new project. I honestly believe that these aren't mind-blowing, but they have been pretty useful to me. First, I like to use the game board technique. So I take a blank paper and make a ton of circles. Each circle follows the next one, and they all have a number above or inside them. I like to think that each circle represents a chapter in the story I'm telling, so I try to write in a few words about what would happen in each chapter. This way I'm able to see the complete draft and understand where the story is going. Of course, there is not enough space in a piece of paper, and as you go on, you will change many things. But I still think it's good to know how much you have planned out your story in your head. The second technique is more of a continuation of the game board technique, writing a script. So it's very similar to what I used to do in the Wattpad story, but writing a script is more about precise dialogues and actions rather than descriptions. This way you can focus on what you want to show. Number 4. Current project. The project that I'm currently working on, it's called My Friend and I Woke Up in Another World. It's obviously very much inspired by the transmigration and reincarnation boom, focusing in the following idea. What if two friends wake up in another world, but only one of them wants to go back? The main characters are Dion and Bernard. I'm very excited to share more about this world little by little, so join me if you want to know more about this project.